Super spooky stories for kids. Creepy classics. Introduction. People of all ages all over the world like scary stories. Some stories have been told and retold so many times that they have become classics. That doesn't make them any less scary. In fact, that might make them more scary. Changing small details makes stories more believable. Imagine a story that takes place somewhere you have never been. It might make it harder for you to imagine it happening. Thinking something happened far away might help you feel safe. Set the story in your own neighborhood, and it almost sounds real. Creepy classics have been around for a long time. They will be told for many years into the future, and they will always be exciting. Stories around the world. How do you tell stories? It may depend on where you live. In Hawaii, hula is both a dance and a story. Without the chants or songs, the hula dance loses its meaning. In Korea, a singer and drummer pair up. The tale is told through chanting and singing. Stories in Ghana are performed with an audience. Tribal history, fables, and lessons are told. Dancing, drumming, and singing are all part of storytelling. Sometimes the audience joins in. Indigenous people in Australia have told the same stories for 300 generations. That is more than 7,000 years. To have the same stories told in the same way for so long is amazing. Chapter 1. Dracula's Secret. Based on the original story by Bram Stoker. Jonathan looked out the window of the carriage. It was foggy outside. Hundreds of bats were flying through the air. He could hear wolves howling. He clutched the secret packet he was carrying tighter. His boss, Mr. Hawkins, had asked him to deliver it all the way to Romania. He was to take it to Count Dracula of Transylvania. Frightful fact. Transylvania is a real place. It is in Romania. A Romanian castle called Bran Castle inspired the castle in Dracula. Today, it is a monument that people can visit. Even though Dracula made Transylvania famous, the story was not published in Romanian until 1990. The carriage stopped in front of a huge castle. Jonathan stepped out. He swallowed. Then he rang the doorbell. A man in a fancy suit opened the door. "Welcome to Transylvania," he said. "I've been expecting you." The Count led Jonathan to a dining room full of food. "Are you eating too?" Jonathan asked. The Count smiled. Two sharp white teeth glimmered in the candlelight. "I will eat later," he said. Who was Bram Stoker? Bram Stoker was born in Ireland in 1847. He worked at Dublin Castle. At night, he wrote for a newspaper. In the late 1870s, he started working with an actor named Sir Henry Irving at a theater in London. Some believe Irving was part of Stoker's inspiration for Count Dracula. Stoker's first novel came out in 1875. He wrote 12 novels during his life. In 1897, Dracula came out. Stoker died before it became the huge success we know today. "Here are your papers," Jonathan said. He handed the packet to the Count. "Ah, yes," said the Count. "I have been waiting a long time for this." The next morning, Jonathan decided to explore. He followed a staircase deep beneath the castle. He entered a dark, windowless room. Several huge boxes rested on the floor. Jonathan knelt near one of them. He pulled back the lid. Count Dracula was sleeping inside. His sharp white teeth were showing. Jonathan screamed. The Count was a vampire. Frightful fact. In 1819, John Polidori wrote a vampire story. It was part of a writing contest between friends. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was part of that same contest. Polidori's story would later inspire Bram Stoker. Stoker's story is what all modern vampire stories use as inspiration. Jonathan ran from the room. He ran to the front door. It was bolted shut. The Count had locked him in. Finally, he was able to crawl out a window. Jonathan stole a horse from the stable. He got back to London as fast as he could. Keeping secrets. Keeping secrets can be hard. If it is a good secret, like not telling someone what you got them for their birthday, you can look forward to finally telling it. Sometimes, keeping secrets can make us feel bad. Keeping them might feel like lying. This is bad for your mental and physical health. You might lose sleep. You might get a stomachache. There are people who can help make you feel better. Talk to a parent, teacher, or counselor. They can help you understand your emotions. After a very long journey, Jonathan arrived home. "I'm glad you are here," his wife Mina said. "There are bats flying and wolves howling everywhere." She shivered. That night, Jonathan and Mina went to a play. Afterward, they walked home. It was a full moon. A man in a fancy suit passed them on the sidewalk. "Good evening," said the man. He smiled, showing 2 sharp white teeth. It was Count Dracula. Jonathan ran to his boss's house. "I must know the meaning of the papers I gave to the Count," Jonathan said. "They will let him move to London," Mr. Hawkins said. He can move here?" Jonathan stammered. "In fact," Mr. Hawkins said, "Count Dracula bought the house right next to yours." Frightful fact. A play based on Stoker's story opened on Broadway in 1927. The movie that came out in 1931 was based on that play. Since then, Dracula has been in more than 200 movies. Chapter 2. Dr. Jekyll's Diary. Based on the original story by Robert Louis Stevenson. I am going to write everything down. Mr. Hyde is near. He will be here at any moment. I have been waiting for him. It all started about a year ago. Back then, I was a good doctor. I helped many sick people. Frightful fact. In the United States, the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was printed in cheap books that each cost 1 penny. They were called penny dreadfuls. Dreadful means something that is extremely bad or causes fear. Penny dreadfuls were full of scary, shocking, and crime-filled stories. Some people call penny dreadfuls the scary movies of the Victorian period. But then I discovered a magic formula. It could make me 2 different people. My good side would be one person. My bad side would be a totally different person. I called him Mr. Hyde. Mr. Hyde has beady gray eyes. He has wild hair. He is noisy and rude. He is not like me at all. Victorian Tales. The Victorian era in England was from 1837 to 1901. Queen Victoria ruled the country. It was a time of scientific discovery. People were also interested in supernatural beings, such as ghosts. Some Victorians wanted to talk to ghosts. Others just wanted to hear about them. Scary stories as we know them today date back to this time. Cheap books and magazines were something everyone could buy. People loved being entertained by spooky stories. Women wrote some of the best ghost stories. Around 70% of ghost stories printed in the 19th century were by women. The first time I drank my magic potion and went out as Mr. Hyde, he took a carriage ride. He yelled, "Take me downtown!" When he arrived, he shouted and threw some coins onto the ground, scaring the driver and his horse. Then Mr. Hyde ran away. For months, I was Dr. Jekyll during the day and Mr. Hyde at night. It was great fun. One afternoon, I had a visit from a friend. "Dr. Jekyll, we've been friends for a long time," Mr. Utterson said. "I just wanted to see if anything is wrong." "Nothing is wrong," I answered. "This new friend of yours, Mr. Hyde, seems to be trouble," said Mr. Utterson. "Dear Mr. Utterson," I said, "Mr. Hyde is simply interesting. He is fine. I am fine. Now, goodbye. I have work to do." Who was Robert Louis Stevenson? Robert Louis Stevenson was born in Scotland in 1850. As a child, he was often sick. He used this time to build up his imagination. His family expected him to be an engineer or a lawyer. He knew he wanted to be a writer, though. He went to school and studied to be a lawyer, but he never became one. In 1883, he finished his first novel. Treasure Island was an adventure story. Popular pirate facts and sayings like "X marks the spot" and "one-legged captains who have parrots" are from Treasure Island. Stevenson showed that he could write both adventure books and spooky stories. The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde came out in 1886. I went right down to my lab and drank my magic potion. I only had half a glass, but I changed into Mr. Hyde even faster than usual. I sneaked out the back door. I began making trouble around the town. "Hey, you!" a police officer yelled. He began chasing me. I ran. Dr. Jekyll could not go to jail. I made it back to my lab. I drank a glass of my magic formula to change back to the good Dr. Jekyll. Nothing happened. I drank another glass. Still nothing. Finally, after 4 full glasses of formula, it worked. I knew that Mr. Hyde could get Dr. Jekyll into trouble, so I locked away my magic formula. I did not have much left anyway. Scary movies. The first movies came out in the late 1800s. They were short films. People paid 5 cents to watch them. As movies got more popular, directors were able to tell longer stories. And they wanted to tell scary stories. In 1931, many horror movies came out, including Dracula, Frankenstein, and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Frightening makeup and scary lighting helped make the monsters look real. Today, we might think those movies seem fake. But without those first films, we would not have the horror movies we love today. Yesterday morning changed everything. When I woke up, I looked in the mirror. I saw Mr. Hyde's face, but I had not taken any magic formula. I ran down to the lab. I drank 5 glasses of magic formula. Finally, I changed back into Dr. Jekyll. An hour later, my head started to ache. I was Mr. Hyde once more. This time, it took 6 glasses to change back. It was the last of my magic formula. I have just a short time left. I am writing so everyone will know the horrible truth that I, Dr. Jekyll, am also Mr. Hyde. And Mr. Hyde is coming. I cannot stop him. He is almost here. Frightful fact. The Incredible Hulk is based on both Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and Frankenstein. Chapter 3. The Mummy's Ring. Where should I set these? Judson scooted through the door. She was carefully carrying some old jars. They were overflowing with fake gems and jewelry. Judson and her younger brother Davis were visiting their uncle. He worked in a museum. They were working on a display about ancient Egypt. "Over there is fine," said Uncle Howard. Whoops! Judson tripped. The gems spilled out onto the ground. They went everywhere. Judson and Davis tried to pick them all up. That night, Davis went to bed early. He said he did not feel well. The next morning, he looked even sicker. "What if this is some kind of mummy curse?" Davis asked, worried. "I heard mummies don't like it when their treasures are disturbed." "How could we be cursed?" Judson asked. "We haven't moved anything." What are mummies? Mummies can be people or animals. Their bodies have been dried or preserved. Studying mummies can help us understand life long ago. When we think mummy, we usually think of Egypt. But mummies have been found around the world. Chile and Peru are home to the oldest mummies in the world. Their mummies were made 2,000 years before the ancient Egyptian mummies. Ancient Egyptians had their own way of making mummies. It was important that a person's body was as lifelike as possible. Making a mummy took 70 days from start to finish. It was expensive. Rich or important people were the only ones who could afford it. "What about the stuff you spilled yesterday?" Davis asked. "Those were fakes," Judson said. "Most of them were," Davis said. "But there were some real pieces there, too. Uncle Howard has information cards that we were supposed to put out with them." Judson ran back to the museum. She started going through the jars. She matched all the cards and jewels, except for one. Judson held up the last card. It showed a small ring. Judson looked all night. Finally, she found the ring. It had rolled under a bigger piece of the exhibit. Judson carefully set the ring on top of the jar. The next morning, Davis was feeling much better, and everyone was much more careful after that. Reclaiming history. For many years, people visited Egypt. They took treasures home with them. Sometimes they bought things that had been stolen from tombs. Every missing treasure is one that cannot be studied. It is one that Egypt will never be able to display in a museum. Tomb raiding damages ancient sites. Today, Egypt is working hard to bring its stolen items home. Many museums around the world have objects that were taken from other places. Do you think museums should return these objects? How would you feel if somebody took something from your house without permission?